Welcome to the Avaya ACE Web Services Trainer video guide, Part 1, Getting Started, Part 1b, about Aura Service Providers. If you're familiar with the Avaya ACE Web Services, you will be aware that they enable client applications to run in multi-platform and multi-vendor environments where some users receive communications services from, say, Avaya Aura, others from Avaya CS1000, and others may be from Cisco Unified Communications Manager. In ACE terminology, the platforms that provide the underlying communication services to users are known as service providers. The Avaya ACE Web Services Trainer can be used to exercise communications capabilities provided by any of the supported service providers, but has been optimized to demonstrate those provided by Avaya Aura. However, Avaya Aura isn't actually a single service provider. Depending on its configuration, it can act as a SIP service provider, a TR87 service provider, or both. Knowing about the Avaya Aura service providers will help you use the trainer and understand what you see. Let's start by taking a look at the architecture of an environment similar to that being used in this video guide. The elements inside the grey box are located in the remote lab, and those outside in the local development environment. As you can see, the remote lab contains an Avaya ACE server and an Avaya Aura configuration that includes Session Manager and Communication Manager deployed as an evolution server. In addition, the remote lab includes a number of media elements which enable client applications to exercise the web services ad hoc conferencing, audio call, and message drop and blast capabilities. The Avaya Media Server is an optional element for deployment with Avaya ACE, but is required if you want to take advantage of any of its media capabilities. In addition, the Nuanced Speech Server supports the playing of text-to-speech messages using the audio call web service, and the DevConnect Media Store application enables the trainer to exercise the message drop and blast web service. We'll look at these media elements in more detail in later parts of this video guide. When you use the trainer to, for example, initiate a third-party call or play an audio message, a SOAP request is sent to the appropriate web service located on the Avaya ACE server. In addition to the web services, the Avaya ACE server hosts a series of adapters that reformat requests so that they can be processed by the various service providers that ACE supports. Avaya ACE uses the appropriate adapter to format the request and routes it to the appropriate service provider interface, in this case to the Avaya Aura SIP or TR87 service provider interface. Notice that SIP service provider requests are routed to Session Manager, where the SIP devices are registered, and that TR87 service provider requests are routed to Communication Manager Evolution Server. In actual fact, in the current release of Avaya ACE, TR87 service provider requests are routed via Avaya Aura Application Enablement Services, which is not shown on this diagram. In future releases, TR87 service provider requests will be routed directly to a Communication Manager interface. All this poses a couple of obvious questions. Are there any differences between the capabilities provided by the SIP and the TR87 service providers? And how does ACE decide which service providers to route requests to? I'll address each of these questions in turn on the next two slides. The answer to the first question, are there any differences between the capabilities provided by the SIP and TR87 service providers, is yes, there are. This diagram shows those web services and operations that are supported by each service provider. Those at the intersection are supported by both. So, for example, the audio call web service is only supported by the SIP service provider, the call notification web service is supported by the TR87 service provider only, and version 2 of the third-party call control web service is supported by both. The answer to the second question, how does Avaya ACE decide which service provider to route requests to, is that ACE applies routing rules based on the address URI of the calling party passed into the request. In the remote lab, the routing rules have been configured so that if the calling party's address is a SIP URI with the format SIP:extension number @avaya.com, it is routed to the SIP service provider interface. If the calling party's address is a TEL URI with format TEL:extension, it is routed to the TR87 service provider interface. To enter an address URI in the Avaya ACE Web Services Trainer user interface, you select the URI type from a drop-down menu and enter the user's extension number. The trainer automatically adds SIP: or TEL: before the extension number, as appropriate, and appends @avaya.com to SIP URIs. The trainer sometimes offers a third address format for ACE URIs. This is a proprietary format developed especially for use with Avaya ACE, but is not currently supported in the remote lab and therefore not covered in this video guide. To learn more about ACE URIs, read the Avaya ACE product documentation. All of this suggests an additional question. Can an individual user benefit only from those capabilities supported by one or other service provider? The answer to this is actually no. The capabilities provided by both the SIP and TR87 service providers can be applied to the same device. This is because there is equivalence between the SIP and TEL URI address formats. For example, in the remote lab environment, the URIs TEL:20081 and SIP:20081 both address the same device. To access web service operations that are supported by the SIP service provider only, specify URIs in SIP format. To access web service operations that are supported by the TR87 service provider only, specify the URIs in TEL format. Finally, be aware that the SIP and TR87 service providers may not both be available in your local Avaya Aura configuration. For example, if you have an all SIP configuration where Communication Manager is deployed as a feature server, only the SIP service provider will be supported. If you have an all non-SIP configuration where H323 endpoints are registered with Communication Manager Evolution Server and there is no session manager in the environment, only the TR87 service provider will be supported. That ends part 1B of this video guide, which described the Avaya Aura service providers and how they relate to the capabilities provided by the Avaya ACE Web Services. Now watch part 2, which uses the Avaya ACE Web Services Trainer to demonstrate how client applications can initiate two-party calls.